People have been talking about parasocial relationships a lot lately, but is anyone using the term correctly? It's used to describe such different actions and events, and it seems like a catch-all term made specifically to attack someone's fans. Today, I'll be going into the weeds of it, and although yes, there are negative consequences, we need to make sure we're all on the same page and not ignoring the positives that can come up too. As I just said, the most important factor when having discussions like this is to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. When a term like parasocial relationship becomes so popular, the discourse often centers around what someone thinks or what they've heard someone else say. And you'll notice, I'm not talking about facts or research. Parasocial relationships have been a thing for decades, but defining exactly what they are and how they come about is only good for research papers. It doesn't make it drama content. So if I wanted to make a video that could get clipped and go viral, I'd say something like, parasocial relationships are evil, or parasocial relationships rot your brain. Sadly for my analytics though, I care more about making a truthful video than I do getting loads of views. So, since I wrote a report on this for my psychology class last semester, let's start by defining some terms I found in papers. The first important nuance comes from differentiating parasocial interactions and parasocial relationships. They're different concepts. A parasocial interaction can be defined as a simulacrum of conversational give and take that takes place during a media exposure situation between users and a media character. What the hell does that mean? Well, what this definition is describing is the illusion of a relationship between you and a media character while you're watching something. And it's important to recognize in this definition that a media character doesn't have to be real. As much as it can be a streamer, a TV host, or someone on the radio, it can also be an anime character, your favorite protagonist from a novel, or a computer-generated pop star. Parasocial interactions and relationships deal with much more than just the internet. And the term illusion here is chosen for a very specific reason. From a psychological perspective, parasocial interaction is not very different from other illusionary experiences, including optical illusions, in which, despite their knowledge, observers intuitively sense something that is not objectively true. You don't have to be missing something to have parasocial interactions. If you type a joke into chat and the streamer laughs, as much as you may know they have no clue who you are, you still feel some pride. They aren't your friend, but you told a funny joke, and it's the recognition that makes you feel good. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's involuntary, and illusions are made to trick you. Our brain has been evolving for tens of thousands of years to deal with other people, and the internet that's only been around for 30 years is bound to mess some stuff up. But parasocial relationships are slightly more intense than these interactions. Parasocial relationships can be understood as any social relationship users develop towards characters they only know from the media. So the parasocial relationships we often hear about, like wanting to be friends with content creators, fall into this category. But this also deals with people who want to date media creators or those who hate creators. Any relationship arising solely through the medium of what the other has created is a parasocial relationship. To simplify, people will often feel many parasocial interactions before they embrace this feeling and develop a parasocial relationship. They have a one-sided connection with a character who they've never met and who doesn't know they exist. And I think it's pretty obvious by this definition that some issues will show up. But it's also interesting because it widens the scope from what we previously thought parasocial relationships dealt with. All I've heard about online when dealing with parasocial relationships is that it's some fringe behavior that developed with the internet. But that is so far from the case. If you have a favorite character in fiction and you think you really get them, that's a parasocial relationship. If you have a host on TV that you love and you tune into every one of their shows, that's a parasocial relationship. Hell, we can even go back further and talk about radio. If War of the Worlds had such an effect on its public, it's because they believed in and trusted a radio host they had never met. When people are fervent supporters of political figures, most of the time it isn't because they've read through all the legislation they've supported and writings they've produced. It's because they find them likable, and they believe that this politician understands them like no other can. Most of the examples I've just given here are negative, but I think it's obvious to see that since our scope has gotten so much larger than simply a few internet celebrities, there will necessarily be at least some positive effects. We focus on negative effects a lot, and that's because there are many of them. But I think it's important to add at least a little bit of nuance, so I'm starting with the positive effects. To begin with, parasocial relationships help viewers find the content they are watching more engaging and enjoyable. A study showed that participants who watched film clips of a comedy show in which they were directly addressed by the protagonist enjoyed these clips more than participants who watched the same clips without being addressed, and on top of that, addressed participants found the clips to be more sophisticated. Simply by creating parasocial interactions by calling out to viewers, these viewers find the content they are watching more interesting. Breaking the fourth wall in a movie can instantly engage audiences a lot more, and that can explain why so many great movies use this technique. It's also important to fight back against the idea that only those who are isolated and introverted create parasocial relationships. It is a common assumption that those without many friendships in real life will be more likely to develop parasocial relationships than those with many friends. And this is generalized by saying that introverts have more parasocial relationships than extroverts. But this, quote, compensation hypothesis is wrong. Studies have shown that trait extroversion was positively related to parasocial relationship intensity, whereas trait introversion was unrelated. Contrary to popular belief, people with greater interpersonal skills develop more intense parasocial relationships. In these situations, parasocial relationships can become an outlet and not necessarily a trap, as many assume. Parasocial relationships are also not necessarily associated with long-term loneliness. The data isn't clear-cut, but it definitely doesn't show some obvious trend for lonely people to develop them more. Rather, it could affect temporarily lonely people more. Parasocial relationships can help provide a feeling of social support. These individuals may remind themselves of an existing intimate parasocial relationship, where they may actively turn to the media to encounter their favorite character in order to satisfy their thwarted belongingness need. As long as dependencies aren't created in this period, this may help provide a temporary escape. This doesn't seem to be the healthiest option, but as long as it helps some people hold on for a little bit longer, this seems to be an overall positive effect. So parasocial relationships aren't terrible. They can provide help and comfort to many. But that isn't why creators have been talking about them a lot more recently. It's because of all the issues that can arise as well. And they all hinge on one point. All of the benefits talked about here rely on the lack of dependence. They either occur in a short time period or not very strongly, and that's when most benefits can be attained. They straddle the line between parasocial interaction and parasocial relationship. But once they get more intense, that's when problems can crop up. When engagement turns to celebrity worshipping, we stop acting rationally and no longer see the truth in front of us. At what point do parasocial relationships become a dysfunctional substitute for the real life, or proceed in defiance of objective reality? No study will act as if this is an easy issue to solve. It's not. It deals with a lot of complex causes and can be different from individual to individual. But a general answer could be that, first, parasocial relationships turn dysfunctional if their maintenance results, on average, in exclusion rather than inclusion of the individual from existing social groups. If you put creators first, and that starts negatively influencing your relationships with coworkers, friends, family, etc., that means you have a problem. And this isn't just for others. If you put a creator before yourself and your own needs, that means your relationship is problematic. Another important component, and one that gets talked about a lot, is that parasocial relationships may turn dysfunctional if they become delusional, i.e., if individuals become ignorant towards or start forgetting about their one-sided character and increasingly demand reciprocity. Crazy fans and stalkers obsessed with their favorite celebrity fall into this category. A reason these factors could arise comes from our desire for safety. When we feel hungry, thirsty, or need to go sleep, we simply satisfy these desires and try to get back to a sense of comfort and safety. And as we get exposed to every possible idea online, the same effect occurs mentally. When anyone can attack you, say something you disagree with, or otherwise go against you, we feel a strong need for some constant, something we can attach ourselves to and trust it will not change. This constant becomes media characters. Whether they be real people or fictional characters, we learn to expect and predict how they will act and can hold on to that. When your favorite streamer goes live every day and says things you agree with or find funny every day, you get to think you know them. And so if someday a flaw shines through and you realize they're human just like everyone else, that creates a rupture. As much as you could have obsessed over them when they were perfect, this flaw is a betrayal of your trust and of your ideologies you've plastered onto them, and you go to hating them. When creators get canceled every other day by their communities, that doesn't mean they're not messing up, but that does mean there's an issue because you aren't considering them as real, flawed people. Bo Burnham talked about this in his latest special, and if you were confused when you watched it, I made a video explaining inside. I've touched on these issues being amplified by social media a few times, but But as I close this part, I want to emphasize this isn't just my opinion. Studies have been made about this too, and they found that parasocial relationships are linked to YouTube addiction. Researchers gave 932 people a series of questionnaires, and they found that the more intense the parasocial relationship with a favorite YouTuber is, the higher YouTube addiction is. This isn't a coincidence. They also found that the specific architecture of YouTube seems to encourage the development of celebrity figures through parasocial relationships. Just like the recent controversy around Facebook allowing hate speech, these companies care most about what will keep you on their platform the longest, and parasocial relationships do that. YouTube seems to have different functionalities that specifically promote asymmetrical relationships between viewers and YouTubers. To do a quick summary of what we've seen here, parasocial relationships don't need to be a bad thing, but often end up that way. Companies and individuals try to create them since their end goal is dependence. And as individuals become addicted and separated from reality, although it's at this point most issues arise, it's also when the most money can be made. Parasocial relationships are widespread, and celebrities have been dealing with them for decades, but the problem with the internet is that it has made them even more common and intense. In certain stan groups who take pride in how much they adore their celebrities, parasocial relationships can be not only acceptable, but celebrated. The discourse often gets blurred between people simply enjoying content and others taking it too far, but both sides focus a lot on attacking and ridiculing others. Parasocial phenomena don't need to be bad, but it's important to recognize they often are, and this problem isn't going to get any better. We need to focus on the facts and try to attack this problem at its roots. A few profit off of these relationships, and we need to do our best to mitigate their influence before the problem becomes uncontrollable. I did my best not to talk about any creators or fandoms specifically because, again, I think generalizing in these issues just pushes people further apart. If you like this video, my next one will be on why creator apologies are terrible, and I'll be streaming myself live, making it at twitch.tv/TheRedheadBoy. Subscribe and leave a like if you've made it this far, and I'll see you next time.